Hi, I'm Ari, this is John, and this is John, and we're here to discuss ideologies. And I can say that ideologies are a major part of politics, I would say. I mean, we see the Tea Party, right? Are they not ideologically driven? I think we can agree with that.
Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, some governments like the communist ones, right? They're ideologically driven, like USSR or Mao's China.
Right, they have propaganda to go along with their ideology.
Yes, and you have the more mainstream ideologies too: conservatism, liberalism, and I'm sure that most people will agree that much of how we see politics is done through an ideological lens, and that's politicians do it too.
No doubt.
We kind of know what they stand for based on their ideology and how far they go with it. So let's just, I'm going to bring up some background information about ideologies. The term ideology originates with a guy named Antoine de Tracy. He's a French philosopher, not one of the better known ones, but he was around during the time of the French Revolution. Okay, and I have, I think, a pretty good definition of it in this book, Ideology by Michael Frieden. So you can look, it's a very short introduction. And the definition he gives is that ideologies are a set of ideas, beliefs, opinions, and values that 1. Exhibit a recurring pattern, 2. Are held by significant groups, 3. Compete over providing and controlling plans for public policy, 4. Do so with the aim of justifying, contesting, or changing the social and political arrangements and processes of a political community. So there's a lot to that, but I think if you let's look at it closely, it should more or less capture the essence of what we normally think about it. Let me just give some broad examples of what are considered to be ideologies. Some examples are some of the better known ones: conservatism, liberalism, socialism, right? You also, some that you may not think of as necessarily being ideologies would be nationalism, environmentalism, feminism, so
Patriotism?
that kind of goes into
extreme, like
nationalism.
Nationalism.
That's like a
patriotism.
variant. I would say that's a variant of nationalism.
Yeah.
There's also, I went to Wikipedia, not necessarily the greatest source, but for this purpose I think it's okay. There's also, they put in religious fundamentalism, anarchism is considered, so it's quite broad.
Yeah.
Some even say don't have governments at all, right? That's their political
anarchy,
view.
more or less.
That's what anarchy is, right? That's, and there are a whole bunch of variants of even anarchy. If you look at Wikipedia, there's even an entry for green anarchism and Jewish anarchism.
Okay.
So I urge the viewer to look into that stuff.
And there's something called nihilism too.
Yeah.
Nihilism.
Nihilism.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of greatly overlaps with anarchism.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
It's a philosophical version
So-
of the ideology of anarchy.
And
basically.
I've seen quite a lot of people make the claim that, well, more from the left, they would say that the Tea Party believes in nihilism or is promoting, or nihilism, I should say. Yes, so now I know that us three are usually more liberal. I'm going to try to play devil's advocate here because we did this once before on another taping. So with the liberalism in the American sense, that usually tends to imply more a bigger role for the government than average, if you will, or the people more in the middle. I guess. I guess, and there are obviously conservatives say less governmental role in society. So they would just say, the government should only do things like law enforcement or defense or
The libertarians,
especially
if I could comment on that.
Go ahead.
I guess I have to bring up certain personalities like Rand Paul.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
He borders on an isolationist kind of policy.
Okay.
And not to get too much off of that, but it just seems like with the political parties, very often it just seems like, and I accuse Democrats of this to some degree too, they will say that, we believe in strict interpretation of the Constitution. But it seems like people often say that if they're trying to prove a certain point that's going to affect them. And it just seems like, and a lot of the Republicans, even the moderate ones, say that there's too much government regulation, that they want less government. But, and this is going to tip into the abortion issue, well, it just seems like the Republicans seem to want to have as little government interference. But if a woman, and I believe I'm correct in saying with Virginia, and maybe one or two other states, if a woman is considering an abortion, she has to be subjected to an ultrasound, invasive or non-invasive. But if a woman just wants to have a baby, she does not, there's no law that says she has to go to a gynecologist at all. And it just seems like they're the ones who are preaching less government interference, but it just seems like if it suits their needs, they want it.
True. They want government intrusion for certain select issues, but not in the broad sense.
Yes.
But when if it serves their own particular purposes, then they're looking to have the government involved.
Yeah. And the Democrats, I can't think right offhand of any specifics, but there could be some analogous situations.
Well, of course. What about the health care reform right now? The government is involved in imposing health care on everybody, brought about by a Democratic president.
Yeah.
So that would be an example.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's go to that abortion example. Maybe a better title for the people that really believe in denying access for abortion may fall into the religious fundamentalism category.
And I think we should bring up that you're focusing, I believe, on the abortion on demand. Because practically everybody is in agreement if the health of the mother is involved. And
almost everybody's.
I'm not sure everyone is.
Not everyone is.
There are some people who feel
strict, really strict.
If the mother's
religious conservatives, very strict.
Yeah, if her life is in danger, well, as long as the baby's born.
Correct.
Now, I may be oversimplifying that, but I think there are groups that think
some that are that extreme. Yeah.
And of course, there's the issue of incest and rape.
True.
And I know, on a personal note, I used to aggravate my mom, who is very much against abortion on demand. And I said, well, supposing a woman is raped by a healthy rapist, I mean, there's no incest involved there.
Yeah.
Well, why not let that happen? So it strikes to me like a little contradiction there.
Can I, let me bring up this example. Like, suppose that a woman just said at the 8th month of pregnancy, you know what, I don't want this baby anymore. Like, what about that one?
Well, you see, this is why they talk about the trimesters and all that.
Exactly.
And I know at best it gets into a gray area. Because one could say, well, like the people who oppose the abortion on demand are saying, then this isn't a child until so many months, and and this can be tricky. I personally believe, if I could just bring in a personal thought, that this is between a woman, her doctor, and her family. And I think there should be no government.
Even in the third trimester? Suppose it's 1 week from the scheduled delivery date.
Here's where
that's
I may be contradicting myself somewhat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation.
But I think some kind of...
Abortion on demand should be limited at some point, because then it becomes like termination of an incipient life on demand, just because somebody decides at that moment that, oh, I changed my mind after carrying the baby for 2 trimesters and into the third trimester, that, oh, well, I really don't think I want the baby now, and it's a week from delivery.
It's like, at what point do we draw...
At what point do you say, look, you've committed yourself to this, now you have to carry through. You've accepted the pregnancy, you've gone this far, you can't now, 2 weeks from delivery, say, oh, I don't want this baby, I want to abort it. That doesn't seem fair.
Well, this is why...
To the baby.
This is why we have maybe arbitrarily drawn lines
I think we have to draw lines. There have been societies in the past, I'm sure you guys know, where infanticide was practiced, and it was an accepted norm. That a woman could, and I don't think that's true anywhere on the planet today, although it might be in some tribe somewhere.
I think in China,
remotest parts of
China, it's normal to abort because of
not
the girl.
We're talking about infanticide now, where a woman has the right to kill the baby after it's born, postpartum.
Yeah,
and that seems kind of strange and ridiculous to us now today. That we would allow
the people from Troy, ancient Troy, they had this. I don't want to say they had a master race philosophy, but if a child was born retarded or deformed, it was almost policy, and it was ingrained in the people that, gee, it's too bad that I gave birth to a deformed, obviously
that brings us into eugenics.
And then the child would be destroyed.
That's eugenics.
Would be killed as humanely as possible.
Well, that sort of stuff is similar to what happened in Nazi Germany.
That's what happened in Nazi Germany.
But,
and this country, excuse me, Ari, this country had a eugenics movement that was pretty strong at one time as well.
Yeah.
The idea
not
being,
just
of course,
to
purge, other countries as well, to purge the population of unwanted and defective human beings. But then that becomes a question of who's the arbiter? Who's going to decide what's a perfect human being or an acceptable human being, or what imperfections are allowed and which aren't?
Yeah.
And so somebody has to be the dictator or the arbiter, and that's difficult.
Well, being that the United States is not a totalitarian country where the state has its own ideology,
right.
We're free to pick between liberalism, nationalism, libertarianism, environmentalism, whatever. What got you ultimately to decide that? I would say maybe both of you think in most of the practical cases that are out there, abortion should be allowed in most. The ones that typically arise, I would say. You want to say first, or
how I got involved in taking a position?
What got you to that position?
To the point where I feel that abortion should be allowed up to a certain point.
Most of the practical cases, let's put it that way. Like, I'm not sure you would, for example, be in favor of abortions because it's going to be a girl as opposed to a boy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I can't say that I can remember clearly. It was a long time ago that I reached the decision that abortion basically should be allowed, from my point of view, my ideology. But I don't know when. Maybe when I was in my 20s. That's a long time ago for me now. But I don't think it was like I sat down and said, oh, should it be allowed or shouldn't be allowed? It was an evolutionary process that was part of the way I thought about everything else in life. And I look around and I see that trees put out so many seeds, for instance, and only a handful of those seeds ever implant themselves into the ground and ultimately grow up to become new seedlings and then new trees.
Yeah, right.
And so in nature, it's like to have something come to full term and to become whether it be a tree or plant of some sort or another human being, it's the rare case. Most conceptions of plants, again, are not going to ever become a life that's going to live and have in existence on this planet. So with animal life, it's somewhat similar. There's no guarantee, there's no right to life built into nature anywhere. Man decrees that we have this right. In our societies, we decree that we have a right to life. But where is it written anywhere in nature that any being that conceives an incipient life within its womb, whether that is going to have to come to term and become an individual that's going to have a chance to live and breathe? I mean, would that we had a planet that was infinite, that the space was unlimited, that resources were unlimited. We could conceive where everybody that was, every conception could come to fruition and be born. We could provide for all of this life. But it's not feasible, realistic, to expect that every pregnancy should, philosophically speaking, come to term, full term, and become a life to live out in existence on this planet. We just don't have enough space. We don't have enough resources, and so population on this planet today is what, 7 billion plus.
Most of the demographers use logistic growth models. You ever heard of those? So they take into account carrying capacity and that sort of thing.
That's exactly what we're talking about here. We don't have the carrying capacity for every being that's conceived and necessarily to come into full term. And what about China at this point? Don't they have a one-child per family?
Yeah, but I think their population overall is decreasing at this point.
Only because of that policy.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about that to say.
I think when a woman has her second child, now I could be wrong, I'd have to check my facts on this.
Right.
But I believe a woman is automatically sterilized.
Yeah.
In China. As far as I know, in the countryside, they tend to have actually more than one child to this day.
Right. Well, they're violating the state's laws.
I'm not enough of an expert on China to comment on the details about that.
Yeah.
But I want to hear this, John's view as to why he got it.
Well, it was probably in my 20s, and I think it's almost formulaic that a lot of people, whether they go to college or if they do or do not, or whether they're high school dropouts, I think that when you're in your early to mid 20s is when you start really formulating and shaping your views on a lot of philosophical issues, and I'm including politics in on that. Of course, we can always alter our thoughts, we can change our minds, we may evolve into thinking different ways. But about the abortion issue thing, if you could go back to the animal kingdom, creatures that have a whole lot of offspring, like fish, most of them die within months. Okay, now getting
what
back,
I was talking about in connection with the trees, they're very similar.
Getting back to the higher forms of life, mammals. If in the wilds, let's say that a leopard gives birth to 1 or 2 cubs, as an example. If one of those cubs, if the mother senses that there's something wrong with that one offspring, be it she senses it's the animal equivalence of being retarded or the animal equivalence of just simply being deformed, the mother very often will kill that offspring or withhold nourishment from it, and it will die. And this happens to many creatures.
Birds is another example. Birds will do that. They may lay 3 or 4 eggs, but they will only take care of 1 or 2.
Because they have a sense or instinct that one is...
They want to know which ones are going to be the strongest and have the best chance to live, and they can't feed all of them, so they make a decision to make a selection.
And if these particular creatures have defective genes, and I know this is rather chilling, bordering on eugenics, but I'm just looking at the biology of it, okay, is that if this particular creature or set of creatures had defective genes, even if they could reproduce, they're reproducing defective genes, and so by having it so they die, then they are not going to, this taps into Darwinism.
Oh, absolutely.
And on the human level, may I mention? Okay, it's just that. All right, we humans have certain ethics that you can have a retarded child, and because the child's retarded, we're not like the ancient Trojans and say, well, throw this one off the cliff.
Throw them to the lions.
Yeah.
We don't do
No,
that.
we keep that person alive, and even though they may be in a very vegetative state, we feel that we have to do this.
Provide them a life.
Okay, but in the rest of the animal kingdom, if anything, the mother very often will do her own infanticide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Sure.
now I'm not saying that we humans should do that,
No,
but I think it's kind of interesting to notice that.
it has been done.
Yeah,
In other cultures.
I have to say that unlike you two, I tend not to develop my political views off of ecological inspirations.
Okay.
Well-
I'm just.
Well, like I said, we all have different views on that point.
Well, I think that's what you and I have in common is that our stance on abortion, as an example, stems from our naturalistic sense of what life is like for creatures, generally speaking, on this planet. And
Well-
it's got a Darwinian kind of eugenic component to it, as you mentioned.
Oh, I know that.
I'm glad you brought up that eugenic piece of it because, as you pointed out, going into the 20th century, at least the first half of it, eugenics idea was quite popular, especially with the Nazis.
Yeah.
But also, I believe George Bernard Shaw believed in.
I think so,
this,
yeah.
And I think Margaret Sanger
Yeah.
is somebody who could come into this, and she was a very strong believer in contraception.
Mm.
It wasn't so much that, well, you can still have normal relations with your wife and not get her pregnant and be stressing your economics, but there's some evidence, I believe, to show that she felt that certain groups, although she was accused of being somewhat racist, that were, in other words, she felt the wrong kind of people, to paraphrase her, were reproducing more than they should be.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, that could be taken horribly out of context.
I know that eugenics was in vogue even back when she was alive, and even in the United States.
Yeah, well, you know, the eugenics is almost like somebody trying to breed cattle. Well, not trying, but breeding cattle, or raising dogs or cats or something. And I'm not trying to equate humans with dogs and cats, but
They're selective breeding.
it's selective breeding. Thank you. That's exactly what it
That's what
is.
it's called. We selectively breed dog breeds and cat
Yeah.
breeds, and it's fine as far as we're concerned where it's not a human species that we're dealing with. But when it concerns humans, we draw the line and we say, oh, eugenics is not a good thing, it's a bad thing. But in principle, I think it might not be bad. Again, it's like, who's the arbiter? Who would we empower with the wherewithal, the right to make decisions on who's fit to live and who's not fit to live?
Or who should marry
Who should marry
and have
whom?
children.
Who should be allowed to marry?
Or some people had children without getting married too. So I mean, like I often thought that before people get married, maybe they should pass some economics test. But the loophole is, how could you stop two people living together who aren't married, and they
I
can
know,
still get
exactly.
pregnant? And it seems like the people who are really and truly not too intelligent, in
Make
many
a lot of
ways,
babies.
have children. They either don't know how to use contraception, or they don't think.
Or maybe they
About
just think
the
that they're rabbits and they don't realize that they're human.
Yeah, well, I don't want to get too
Yeah,
off of this,
but
Right, right.
okay, I'm glad you brought up the point about who decides whether
who
to have a
decides.
kid or that sort of thing. Like, should this be just a matter of democracy? Should this be a live and let live
Well,
sort of
let us
thing?
say
The
that a
will of the
woman
majority.
has a test. I mean, I don't mean to keep dwelling on this, but I
Yeah.
think this is an important topic about the abortion issue. If a woman knows that she's going to give birth to a horribly deformed and very profoundly retarded child,
Or a child that may grow up sickly and never have a real chance to live anyway, that may be consigned to die an early death from some horrible malady because the lungs aren't going to fully develop, or there's spina bifida or
Yeah.
other conditions where the child will be consigned to have a terrible life.
and I had no problem with abortion in that
Right.
case at all.
Right.
Well, this did come up in a congressional hearing, and there were some members of Congress that did object to this.
Well, see, this disturbs me. If I could bring out a little personal thing, not real personal, but to me, like I said, abortion issue between the woman, her doctor, and her family. Pardon my slight profanity here. Why the hell should this be a governmental discussion?
Right.
Well,
I am allowed to show anger, yes?
Yes, I'm just gonna play the devil's advocate and bring up the whole point about people perceiving fetus as being a human life.
Right.
So,
Well, it is a human life, but it couldn't be anything but a human life if it's conceived from a male and a female human being. It's a human life, but whether or not it can be considered a person is a different question altogether. Personhood is something that we normally only bestow upon somebody after they've been born. We consider somebody a person. But an unborn fetus is certainly not a person, but it's certainly a human being.
So we have to protect lives as a person, not as a...
Well, that's the way we do it now. We give rights to the born and a certain amount of right to an unborn, but the full status of full human rights can only be bestowed upon somebody in our society when they become a person, which doesn't happen until the fetus comes to full term. It is a baby, it's born, and it gets named, and it has a status at that point, becomes a person. Without a name and without having been born, a human life is not a person.
Now, I believe that if a person
to be.
If you knew that you're going to give birth to a terribly deformed a child that has severe neurological problems, but if that family, that husband and wife, wish to still have this child born, either believing in miracles, and I don't mean to be mocking religion, but this would have to be the only hope that they would have, okay? I believe that they would have the right to do so. But to force somebody to bring this terribly handicapped, disabled child into the world, and it just seems like the ones who are screaming that you should still give birth, are they going to be so quick to want to spend the money to help take care of this horribly disabled person?
Well, that's the point, because then it shades into the idea of the costs of taking care of people who have various terrible health conditions. It costs society. It's much more,
especially if the parents don't have the money.
Right.
Well,
we don't throw them off a cliff.
Suppose, for the sake of argument, that we had a situation, which we don't, where every other child that was conceived was destined to be born with some horrible malady, and if we had left our laws such that all children that were conceived would have to be born and no abortions were allowable, that would mean half the population would be defective in some serious way. That would be an onerous burden upon our healthcare resources. So that would be an example where I think if that were the case, most people would say, hey, abortion has to be allowed because we have to give people the option of making sure that 50-50 chance is not going to result in half the population having to take care of the other half, which are never going to be functional, that are going to be profoundly retarded or profoundly sick and debilitated in some manner.
That ties into the Chinese forcing the women to be sterilized. I think that's very much connected to what you're saying about the conditions affecting the policy. Now, I guess would be a good way to put it.
Okay, I want to bring this to the ideology piece, because many conservatives and or libertarians regarding the whole matter of bringing in a child that has Down syndrome or some extreme deformity of some sort, they would say private charities and or churches should be taking the responsibility for whatever needs this family may have with that child that was brought into the world, rather than having taxpayers do it.
That's the Steve Lonigan philosophy.
Yeah, not just him. And, large geographic swaths of the country believe in this too. I mean, I think geographically most of Texas, you could say, in geographic terms, would believe that, or Mississippi. The idea that this should necessarily be done, that more can't be done outside of government, is not something rare. That idea, it's quite prominent.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned
probably.
Steve Lanigan.
There you
And-
go.
and-
Now
well,
he lost.
well,
in Jersey,
okay,
but
well, all
thousands
right.
did vote
Now,
for him, right?
He believed that he likes the idea of a lot less government, and he said, I believe I'm quoting him correctly, if he was voting on the Social Security Act, he would have voted against it. He believes that if you're down and out, he believes that you can turn to private, charity organizations to help take care of things.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in the food stamps helping people out. Yeah, he's opposed to all kinds of things, and he was proud to say, I'm a right-winger, I'm an extremist. He was proud to say that. Okay, and it's kind of like, why didn't he just have a press conference and say, I'm going to do my best to lose this election against Booker. I'm going to really, really try hard.
Yeah. Well,
Sarcasm intended.
I
Yes.
guess he really believes in his
Well,
point of view, and
but-
I guess I have to respect
He
a
was
man
being
for
honest. You
his
have to-
conviction,
his
but
honesty and
understand,
his conviction.
don't be like, oh my God, you lost, how's that possible? Sarcasm again.
Yes.
You know, like how could he not think he could
It's
possibly
too
win?
far out of the mainstream
For New Jersey.
for New Jersey.
But,
Anyway,
but,
yeah.
but this is important because a guy
Very
like
good.
Ted Cruz, who I'm not so sure is all that distinguishable from Steve Lanigan ideologically,
I
wins
agree.
Texas quite convincingly. I have not heard anything about him being unpopular in Texas. I did hear the opposite of regarding Mike Lee in Utah, because in Utah there are a lot of federal employees, so that there's that
That
distinction
affects
there.
things, doesn't it?
Virginia has a lot of federal employees.
Yeah.
But there are places where the idea of people depending somehow on government, whether through their employment, like as in the case with Virginia,
Mhm.
or let's say with getting Social Security or Medicare. There are but even with the case of Medicare, a lot of people it just doesn't resonate that they, in some way, shape, or form, depend on government.
Yeah.
Now, we have a mixed economy.
Yeah.
I learned that way back in school, Economics 101, literally,
Yes.
that we live in what they call a mixed economy. It's not total laissez-faire capitalism.
Yeah.
Okay, we have regulations.
Mhm.
In fact, people jokingly say the price of milk is regulated more than gasoline.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, but the thing is, we don't live in a totally socialist society,
Yeah.
and I'm not using the word socialist like a fancy, dirty word. You know what I mean? But we live in a mix of
Yeah.
government regulation and free enterprise.
Or a mix of capitalism and socialism.
Yeah.
I mean, Social Security and food stamps and welfare is a form of socialism.
But I guess let's use the example of Ron Paul, like the modern day leader of libertarianism.
You mean the father, the older?
the father?
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
I think it's fair to call him like the
Right, okay.
leading figure of libertarianism.
Mhm.
For him, like as soon as you go outside of the specifics of what the Constitution says, and you
Mhm.
put in something like food stamps or Pell Grants or all that, you're going away from the spirit of America, of liberty, and making America something that shouldn't be and not as good.
Well, the Constitution, I forget the exact numbers,
Yeah.
but you know, it has had quite a
Amendments.
few amendments, which is a basic change. But of course, the way amendments are done, it truly is the will of the people.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
hurdles one has to go through,
Yeah,
you know,
f-
to
for
do
the-
it. It
for-
is the will of the people.
For the record, 3/4 of the states have to ratify
Mhm.
the amendments, and it has to pass both the House of Representatives and the Senate by 2/3.
And I think the state
majority.
legislatures are
And the
involved
state
in that.
That's
legislatures
the
have to pass. That's
ratification.
the ratification.
Yeah. That was-
Okay.
But some people are talking, and I'm not a religious person, but
Mhm.
some people treat the Constitution like it's the Bible or any other holy book.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing is, though, virtually every country in the world that has a constitution has amended it. In fact,
Well,
very often they scrap their constitution
Yeah.
and start over again.
By the way, I don't know if you heard, but there was, I think some people, this includes Rick Perry, actually want to repeal the 17th Amendment, which makes the voting for the Senate, would go back to the state legislature to decide who becomes a senator.
And I'd like to know what the logic of that is. Oh, and I wanted, if I could bring up Teddy Roosevelt, if I may.
Yeah.
Oh, going back to that era, the
Progressivism.
term,
I believe that's
the term liberal actually meant quite the opposite of what it means today. It actually meant that businessmen could do anything they wanted, and with the building of the railroads, they got a lot of government support by granting them land. So there was a lot of help with the government helping them out.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Obama got into a little bit of a turmoil when he was saying about how people are successful in business because of government help.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of people didn't like hearing it. But actually, if you harken back to the development of the railroads, the federal government virtually gave land to the railroads. Oh, and with Teddy Roosevelt, by the way, okay?
Yes.
He was at loggerheads with the Republican Party because he was the trust buster, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, too, is that he felt that the government should be the stewardship of the people. In other words, he actually believed that you should take care of the poor and the very unfortunate people.
Sounds like he was a humanitarian.
And he got a lot of flack even back then.
Yeah.
But I think he was personally a very likable. That had a lot to do with it, even before the days of modern communication.
He was also responsible for the development of the first national parks. Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And so he was an advocate of planetary stewardship, with stewardship of the earth, as well as being a humanitarian.
Exactly. Yes. He
Take care
considered
of
an
people and
environmentalist.
take care of the environment.
Yeah.
Very
much.
much preserve pristine lands. Make sure that certain lands are never developed. That they're left as natural resources for the use of human beings.
I think some of these lands, I believe Yellowstone's an example, actually started going back even Grant during with some of them did become federal lands. But being that we're taping this, what we're doing, this discussion in Caldwell, I want to bring up one of the presidents who was actually born here in this town.
I think he was the only one.
And the only one so far. And that would be Grover Cleveland,
There you go.
who did not believe that it's the government's job to help the poorest people in our country.
Oh, I'm sure you've had quite a few presidents who believe not that you were a bad person because you're poor, because I think a lot of modern day Republicans think that. There's something wrong with you. But I think that some people felt that, well, it's not our job to help you. You got to work yourself out of your hole.
Right.
And I think
pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, so to speak. That's why a lot of libertarians and Republicans and conservatives feel.
There seemed to be a shade of difference between libertarians and the Tea Party or so, because I think there can be some differences. I think the libertarians
might be from the religious right and the Tea Party. So there's that kind of overlap.
Yeah, so the libertarians are more pure, if you will, in wanting no government intervention. Like they probably don't like the forced ultrasounds either. I would think, if they were consistent.
I would think.
Well, if they're I mean, then the question becomes: do they believe the human life should be protected as opposed to quote person or some going back to that abortion? Roe v. Wade goes by fetal viability, I believe, and can the fetus survive outside the womb? And that's the law, the basis of how the line's drawn.
Right, right.
But now a lot of if you're going by the standard of life begins at conception, well, then I guess in some way you're kind of being consistent, even if it's not the best way the way people most of the time would agree with.
But if upon finding out that of course this is, I know it's a huge issue where society weighs in, but if you find, like John brought up that example, if half the people that were born were going to be
destined to be profoundly disabled in some manner.
See, I think massive
Yeah.
things like that.
That would change
really
the mindset.
shape.
That would would tend to change the mindset of a lot of people.
I mean, that almost sounds like a science fiction kind of a
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
where the society, because of radiation or whatever,
Right.
evolved
Mutants. Half the population was mutants
Yeah.
in some way.
and so
That
therefore,
might induce them to change their policy and say, hey, abortion on demand for sure, all the way through to the end of the pregnancy.
or if you had mutants, would have to
Right.
live.
Or maybe infanticide also would be allowed under circumstances
Or
where
the
half
mut-
the population was born mutant.
Or they might have to live in a certain area.
Sure.
So
Well,
aside from like a reservation.
Like the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
No, I mean, think about it. If such a thing were to pass,
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, these changes in attitudes about trust busting or allowing for Social Security, I think that came about with the experience of the American electorate over the centuries and decades.
oh yeah, I would think.
So
that
I
that's
mean, but the idea of let's call it 18th and 19th century American governing styles of the pre-New Deal, pre-progressive era type philosophy, that still has a following of, well, even if it had like a following of 30 million, 40 million or so. I think I saw someplace that the Tea Party has 40 million followers in a nation of 310 million people.
Yeah,
it's
significant, sizable.
And they have the experience in formulating the message and getting it out there, and they have the people in the various branches of the government, whether it's at the state legislative level, at the governorship level, gubernatorialship, or at in Congress. A lot of the people that adhere to these ideologies, they have a strong footprint, if you will.
They have a whole infrastructure, a networking system to.
They have the Fox
work.
News and Rush Limbaugh.
Well, one
that's
thing.
free speech, right?
Yeah,
I guess
no, of course. But one thing I find baffling is like, for example, Texas. I think roughly 25% of the residents of Texas have no health insurance. Now,
I believe that's accurate.
Right now, one may vote for people for various reasons. Like one reason, I mean, the Catholic Church did not endorse Obama mainly because he was pro-choice.
Right.
But if Obama was anti-abortion on demand, the Catholic Church probably would have urged its members to vote for him. Probably, not my original thought. I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
And from some columnists. But the thing that gets me, if you live in a state where, let's say, like Texas, where 25% do not have coverage, how could you vote for somebody who is against this? And now I know there may be other issues. If I could bring up racial thing, maybe some people don't like black people, but I have a feeling even if Obama was a white man and his last name was Smith, there would be still flack against him. Okay.
Well, that's why
because of his policy.
Right?
Yeah, but why would you vote against something that is supposed to help you? Because you don't have insurance. If you are working, your boss by law didn't have to give you anything. And it's just kind of like, I would think you would want to put all that other stuff aside and vote
it's
for.
hard to understand from a purely rational standpoint, but there are a lot of people that vote against their self-interest all the time because they're voting in sync with their ideology. And that brings us back to the point of this.
And that goes beyond rationality, you're saying.
Absolutely. Ideology can shape people's whole life and be in contradistinction to any rational thoughts that they might have about the same subject. If they stop to think about it from a rational, logical standpoint, they wouldn't do what they do. But they don't want to think about it that way. They're driven by their ideology.
And they're shooting themselves in the foot.
They're shooting themselves in the foot. They're driven to think along certain lines that are consistent with their ideology.
I just want to point out, to make this point, that I do have a master's degree in political science. And because of that, I want to make the point that there is a theoretical perspective. It's not really an ideology that it's called rational choice theory. It's like a paradigm that some political scientists use.
Okay.
It's maybe, I'm not sure. It's not. I don't know if it's the most dominant perspective, but it's one of the leading ones. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how kind of what all of us were, or at least you two were alluding to, with the people you would think would vote for what's best for them, as opposed to
Right. But they
what they emotionally feel is
Right.
best. It could be because they really believe for the country it's better not to have the government take care of the needy. They just feel that they're freer, that they're not nobody's. Their prospects of becoming wealthy is better. That, or they're not. Maybe they associate a lot of these government programs, like with health care or education, as being too close to communism. So
Well, what's ironic is a lot of these
Yeah.
so-called red states,
Yeah.
they actually get more federal aid
Yeah.
than state like New Jersey.
Right.
Actually,
it's more of a net,
the net is a
contributor,
minus.
yeah,
Yeah.
than a recipient.
and it's just like, but the problem is, how can I put it? I don't want to sound like an elitist, but the less educated and dumber you are, the less rational you are.
Generally speaking,
I think very
and perhaps even the more ideologically driven, the less educated.
yeah.
Well, and then there might be people that are just not connected, that may be very well educated, like Milton Friedman, but maybe they don't connect as well with somebody that receives Medicaid, for example.
Right.
Or maybe they're working full-time, making minimum wage, but have kids. I know a lot of times with minimum wage, they bring up how those jobs are supposed to be more for teenagers.
Well, you know the flaw in that. You have
That's
people
not
that are
exactly.
around. Well, you're younger than me.
Yeah.
You know that, but we know that there are people who are in their 40s and 50s have been working these extremely low-paying jobs for 20 years or more.
Uh-huh.
So this, as you said, isn't some teenager who's just getting the taste of what it's like to work.
Yeah, there's the theory of how we would perceive things, or like Wall Street Journal might perceive things, versus the practice part of it. And maybe just a lot of people think in terms of theories like, I guess, the Ron Pauls and those people,
Well,
rather
you know,
than as an empirical part. But go ahead.
some people are just doomed through demographics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this idea that you can be anything you want to be. Well, I don't want to say that that's total BS, but I mean, you're trying to be rational again. But you know that if you have a certain demographic background, although you might come from a very bad dysfunctional situation and grow up to be the leader of a corporation and be a really nice guy and all that stuff,
Yeah.
But if you're in a very poor dysfunctional situation, you may not end up going to jail, but you may end up repeating
It's true.
the story of your parents
Absolutely.
working very menial jobs and not progressing much.
In sociology, I think that's referred to as life chances. That's what they call that. And depending on your birth circumstances, your life chances are either more, like somebody born with a so-called silver spoon in their mouth has many more opportunities than somebody born in a ghetto neighborhood. And of course, there are exceptions. People can make it out of the ghetto and become quote-unquote successful, as we deem success to be. Usually that's measured in monetary terms, but I like to think, not to digress, but that success really should be defined properly as achieving what you set out to do. Whatever you seek to accomplish, if you achieve it, then you're a success. Not in society's terms, generally speaking. We usually measure success in terms of dollars. If somebody has a lot of money, we say, oh, that person is successful. But if they don't have a good life and they're not happy, we still say, oh, they're successful, they have tons of money. But success really should be measured in other terms. But that's subject
But to
for
be,
another
dirt
day.
poor.
But to be dirt poor. But again, back to the life chances. Your prospects for having success, whether measured monetarily or in any other manner, are constrained by the circumstances of your birth. and you have many more opportunities and chances if you're born in better circumstances. You will have a better upbringing.
Yeah.
You'll probably go to better schools. You'll have better teachers.
Better
You'll
food
have
to eat.
better food to eat. You'll have a better surrounding, more enriched environment. You'll have more toys to play with. You'll have better friends. Your relationships will be better. You'll have more opportunities of every sort, and it mushrooms and connects in so many ways, and can either make for a person having an opportunity for a good life or not a good life on a probability basis. You can say that, somebody born in good circumstances has X probability. It might be 75% of having a good life, and somebody born in a ghetto has maybe their X probability might be 10%. Maybe they only have a 10% chance of having a really decent life.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
And this can be measured.
And look,
Very
not
much.
to go too far off the track, but look at the circumstances of what happened with this typhoon that just hit in the Philippines. What kind of life chances do these people have now that their life has been intruded upon in the most extreme way by a natural event?
It's one of the worst places on earth to live.
Right. Well, to
As far
start
as
with.
they have earthquakes.
Right.
They have these storms.
Right.
They're poor to begin with.
So your location has a lot to do with your opportunity to have a good and decent life.
Well, let me just bring this back to ideology for a moment. I think on a related matter, our life experiences may guide which ideology we ultimately decide to have. It may be because our parents, maybe we saw them work real hard and we just didn't see that they needed the New Deal or Great Society programs to get them to where they were. They just had these private sector jobs, and that they couldn't connect with the whole government being the reason why they got to where they were. Their relatives did.
That's true of my own parents, but
well, that
right.
just like to say one thing about that, not to interrupt your thought train here, but the ideology, generally speaking, that somebody has, let's say conservative versus liberal, might be more a matter of your birth circumstances and how you were raised, what your parents' ideology was. It would be interesting to find out what percentage of people ever break away from the ideology that their family had, that their parents had. For instance, if a person was born to a Republican family, what is the probability that they're going to switch and become democratic in their thinking? How much is it choice is the question I'm getting to, and how much of it is choice and how much of it is just ordained by the brainwashing or the indoctrination, if you will, that you get by the family that raises you and in the environment that you grow up in.
This is what the political scientists who specialize in quantitative analysis and public opinion type matters do. But sitting right next to me is somebody who had parents that were Republicans.
I was going to say,
became a Democrat.
Well, that's also true over here. If you look over in this direction, my parents were both Republican as well.
and may I ask?
I became first an independent and then later more a Democrat.
See, if I can mention, I know it's easy to digress, but I think it's kind of important because both my mom and dad were from Ohio originally, right? And my father's father was a college professor. And, what's interesting, though, is in Ohio, that has been for many years, whether you were a college professor or not, very much a Republican stronghold. And my grandfather was a sociology professor who specialized in criminality. So, anyway, my mom, her family was not affected by the Depression. Her father was a foreman in a shoe factory. And even though they laid off, I think, close or slightly more than half of the factory at the depths of the Depression, my grandfather, my mom's dad, always had a job.
That's interesting. I had a similar situation. My mother's father was also a shop foreman for the Singer sewing machine company, and he always had a job during the Depression.
Now, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be a Republican.
No.
But
no.
the New Deal policies didn't mean squat to them.
True.
And of course, they used to make jokes about the WPA, people leaning on their shovels, and all that stuff. Of course, there's always going to be people abusing things like that. But I think that the WPA though did help do a lot of good building of things, and you had a lot of
Oh,
people that
absolutely.
helped spruce up our national
Right,
parks.
A lot of
and
dams.
stuff. All right, now here's the thing. Now my dad used to read the Kiplinger Report, a very Republican, I don't want to call it right wing, although maybe it is now, and he used to read it, to my mom, and I would listen to it, And anyway, I wouldn't say I was very indoctrinated, but when I got into my 20s, like I said, I think we start shaping our values and our political persuasions when we're in our 20s. And it just seemed like, then my father hated poor people, but he thought a lot of them were just sponging off the society. And he felt, not that he was totally racist, but he thought that black people had been pretty much the downfall of this country. He said, he just didn't say they should be eliminated, but he just felt they've been a drain, a total drain. Now, there could be some evidence to show that somewhat. That doesn't mean they don't have a right to become better people and all that. But I'm just saying, but it just seemed like the Republican Party didn't seem to give a damn about people that were very poor. It's kind of like, well, you got to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And I was saying, wait a minute, there are people who just can't do that.
Right.
And I started...
They don't have any bootstraps.
Right.
They weren't born with any.
And I started really thinking more and more about this. Of course, I have a history degree in American history and a political science minor. Okay. And I did that because I found that interesting. My father paid for my education. But nevertheless, he got angry at me one time. We were having a debate about Vietnam War and all that stuff. And he said, I didn't send you to college to get your mind twisted, which I thought was very interesting because I thought part of the reason going to college is to develop
a liberal education.
Well, you're thinking whether you agree with mom and dad or not.
Right.
And maybe it might end up shaping your ideology.
Well, that's the thing. I think that shades back into the question of when and under what circumstances will somebody break away from the indoctrination that they had in the family. And maybe going to college is what it takes for a lot of people. And maybe nowadays there are more people than there were in the past because more people going to college that will have a kind of, let's say, broader experience, a more enriched experience of diverse thoughts and reading about and learning about other people and circumstances. You may be more inclined under those circumstances to break away from an indoctrination that you had.
And my dad, by the way, he had a degree in sociology. This and that, he didn't have any education.
For him as far as you're concerned.
but now I don't really know that much about my grandfather. He believed, other than being a professor, but he believed that the society had your circumstances, as you mentioned, had a lot to do with you turning into a life of crime.
Right.
And he very much believed that if you were more educated, you would have more job skills, and you would not be tempted to get into a life of crime.
Right.
And I think my dad's philosophy is he thought a lot of people are just simply born to be bums. People who are barely making above minimum wage.
Right.
And they're not. And
should the McDonald's workers all get SSD?
Or an underpaid underpaid machinist?
Or underpaid machinists?
What I would say
underpaid painters, maybe?
Some sort of, I guess, well, in the case of McDonald's, they're a large multinational corporation, but what about like a mom and pop shop?
Well, the point is there are lots and lots of people. I don't know what percentage number to put on it.
There's another side to this coin, if I could just digress for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
What about Social Security that people get who don't need it when they retire, who have huge incomes and all kinds of other income from private pension plans? What, should they be allowed to collect Social Security?
Or should there be a sliding scale in
reverse on them? That's the other side of the coin.
Now, since we're all Lawrence O'Donnell fans, I want to bring up one of the rewrites he did a while back. I don't know if any of you saw this one, but discussed Frances Perkins, which she was one of the early Secretary of Labor that developed the Social Security program.
Yeah, I saw a program about her.
And her idea was as a way of preventing Social Security from ever becoming this politicized football for the ideologues, if you will. How that would be done is that individuals would just pay into it and get back. So just by paying into the program, you would get some commensurate amount back out of it.
Well, that's the way it is now.
Well,
that's the way it is
but
now.
I don't
It's
think
a
it should be that way.
It's a
personally.
pay-as-you-go system.
Pay as you go.
And
Right.
that's what makes it an entitlement program as distinct from a welfare program where
Right,
you do,
right.
with welfare, as to use the jargon of public policy making, you can get something without necessarily paying into it.
Well,
That's
the thing is,
distinction
well,
there.
the thing is, like when my mom was still alive, and while I was working, okay, well, basically, my understanding of the pay-as-you-go system with the employer contribution, you know, with the workers, is that I was, in essence, paying for my mom. Pay-as-you-go system. In
Yeah.
other words, you are the
Yeah,
monies that are
right.
collected from
Right.
the employer and the worker
Right.
are paying for the retired people.
Right,
Right.
correct.
Okay,
The
right.
younger
yeah.
are paying for all
And
of
and
this.
now that I am retired, I
Right.
used to joke with the guys I used to work with. I said, guys, I would shake their hands and say, pat on the back, and say, thank you very much for helping me in my
Yeah.
retirement. Because they would jokingly hurl obscenities at me. But never mind that. But the point is, that's called pay-as-you-go system. And I know that arithmetic-wise, there is a bit of a crunch happening.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Sure.
because the ratio of worker to retirees
Yeah,
is getting
yeah,
a little
yeah,
out of whack.
yeah.
Of course, we have people living longer,
Yeah.
Yes.
you know, and so there will have to be
I
some.
think the system needs
Adjustment.
to be changed. I
It
think
has to be altered.
that,
Yeah.
that just because you pay in doesn't mean you should be able to take out. I mean, look at insurance. Look at, just generally speaking, any insurance plan that you buy, like healthcare.
Yeah.
Just because you pay insurance for healthcare doesn't mean you have to use it.
Oh, no,
or
it's
that
like-
you're going to use it.
Right.
And basically, you should pray that you don't have to use it.
Like the
that
unemployment
you don't
insurance.
get sick, because those people who do get sick and have to
Yeah.
draw on large quantities of resources have a worse time having to suffer the indignities of their illnesses. Nobody wants to get sick and have to be able to use the resources that are going to be provided because they're covered by health care. But that's an example where you pay into the insurance, but you don't necessarily draw out on an
Right.
equal basis, even though everybody might pay in on a relatively equal basis.
Well, the
and
unemployment.
maybe the Social Security should be the same way. Just because you pay in doesn't mean you necessarily should take out. You should maybe only take out if you need it on an as-needs basis, sliding scale.
Yeah, I have a comment on that. When Social Security was first set up, it was made so that the people receiving it first would be age 65, and life expectancy was actually less than 65
Yes,
when it
Right,
was set
so
up.
they didn't expect to have to pay out to a whole lot of
right,
people.
Exactly,
so-
right.
But because of life expectancy
right,
issues, there are actuarial problems.
They work this out, and I know.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, but these changes have made it.
But why should people like who are millionaires and billionaires be allowed to collect any Social
Well,
Security?
then you as an arbiter
I don't.
or somebody would have to decide a certain point would have to be.
You have to look at whether or not they need it, whether their income is sufficient.
yeah,
It's a tough thing.
I believe that there is some amount where if you make, what is it, 90,000, 100,000, where if you make more than that, you no longer pay payroll, but you won't get Social Security.
There's
or
something about that. I don't know specifically,
I don't
but
know.
I
I've
think the
heard.
more you make, the more you should pay, and the,
But then
and
it
the less you
becomes-
should draw out.
But then it becomes more like welfare. That's what Francis Perkins was trying to avoid.
Well, I
with
don't
the
care what
policy.
Francis. Well, with all due respect to Francis Perkins, I guess she's long deceased.
Oh, yeah.
And she doesn't, live in this world that we live in today, where there is a crunch and there's only so much money available. And I think we have to think in terms of what makes sense for us as a society now. Never mind what the original founder of some movement or original philosopher or ideologue thought about it. We have to think about what makes sense and is in the best interest of most people.
But the issues that she was thinking about, I would say, are still relevant today with the prospect of a program being politicized.
Oh.
Like we see how food stamps, for example,
Yeah.
get politicized, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, if I may say some political, it's like the Republicans are thinking, gee, how can we have more people not vote for us?
Yeah.
Pretty opinionated opinion on my part.
Well,
no, but I mean, it's just statistically. I mean, I don't understand who's working out their strategies. The very people that they have to reach out to try to have them win the national election. It almost seems like they said, "Well, the hell with being president, but we'll be a pain in the ass by keeping power in the House."
They're being true to their ideologies, I guess.
And
they're being driven
but
by
they're
their
kissing
ideologies.
goodbye any chance to ever put a president who's a Republican in it by
Well, it seems
their
like they're
actions.
shooting themselves in the foot. So
Big time.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. So it would seem.
The Republicans at the national level, which is quite different from Republicans at the New Jersey state level.
Of course.
They're caught between expanding their outreach to newer constituents and their traditional base constituents. Right?
Christie put together one hell of a coalition. And I don't want to say that he's a bad guy, but he's a guy who really knows how to work the system. Even though the first elected office he had, because he was a U.S. attorney, I believe, right?
Correct.
And the only elected office he ever had was governor. Like a lot of people that are in politics, they started out being mayors and councilmen, but that's his only experience with being elected official. But he put together coalitions like you wouldn't believe. But he can't put together that same coalition, according to the experts, on the national level.
Yes.
Besides having problems with his own party. Is he right-wing enough? I don't think so.
I don't think he's right wing enough.
For
does he have
for
the
national
conservative
purposes.
bona fides? I don't know.
I don't think so.
For some he does, and for others he doesn't. He's not conservative enough.
He may
He's not a
think
true dyed in the wool conservative.
he may think certain ways, but he may be very opposed to the gay marriage thing, and he may be very opposed to the to having pro-choice. But I think he's like morphed into a situation where I personally don't like these things, but you know what? I'm not going to get in the way. But with the real right-wing Republicans, not good enough. In fact, they were criticizing Christie for not once. Sean Hannity said, not once did he call Obama a liar. And he said, words to the effect, if you don't call Obama a liar, I don't think you're a real Republican.
Right.
Talk about being
That's pretty extreme.
Well,
you know how they are.
If
You can only look at those guys for 5 minutes, and then you start throwing
I
up.
don't look at them at all. anymore.
I look at them for 10 minutes,
if
then I
we're,
get sick.
if we're going by geography,
Yes.
I think Sean Hannity does not, as opposed to demographics. A lot of what Sean Hannity says is actually resonates geographically with much of the country. I mean, if you look at how many counties Mitt Romney won as opposed to Obama, and you thought that whoever wins the most counties is the president, you would think that Romney won.
Oh, you mean nationwide?
Yeah, nationwide.
But
What was the percentage of counties won by Romney? Do you know?
I believe Romney won like at least 2,500 counties, and Obama only won less than 1,000. I believe.
So it was almost
Something
2 to
like
1,
that.
or more than 2
Yeah,
to 1.
maybe even more, like 3,000 for
But
Romney.
you got it.
Wow.
But you have to look at. May I quickly add here, the populations.
Of course. Well,
Now,
that's how it works
you know.
out. It's which counties.
Yeah.
Not all counties count as much as others.
Yeah, so I mean, and you have to look at the breakdown of congressional districts, which cut across county lines. In fact, cities, little towns, not just cities, little towns, you can have congressional districts cutting through. I mean, the boundaries of the cities and the towns have almost nothing to do with that.
We are living in a world where geography, I think in practical terms, does influence our ideology thinking. It's a factor. I mean, if you live in a rural area, with the exception of places like Vermont, which are kind of outliers, but most rural parts of the country tend to be quite conservative. A place like Essex Fells, which is quite affluent, they're going to be more right of center. They believe that that's healthy for the country, that we're separated to the degree that we are by ideology and geographic terms. You follow?
Well, what's a remedy for that? I mean, geography does separate us, and
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the life experience of someone living grew up on a farm and all
Yeah.
that. It's going to be different from someone that grew up on a city and
grew up in a big city like
right,
New York versus
and maybe
somebody
then they
goes out to
see
the farming
the
country.
people as being different. I mean, I think for people in Wyoming, the typical person in New York City is kind of an alien to them as far as what they're really about.
Maybe a light on the horizon, and one thing that helps to change and level a playing field and bring everybody into, even though they're in different geographical locations, is television and movies and the internet. There is a common culture, and there's a larger culture that also works to make people feel that they're part of something larger than the geographic circumstances that they grow up in.
Well, as one of the professors pointed out, that it used to be that the 6:30 news with Walter Cronkite and ABC and NBC had their own versions of them with, I think, rotating anchors. That used to be really what united us as far as the public discourse or public current events matters would unfold and would be discussed and around dinner tables and all that. Nowadays, we're quite fragmented. We have MSNBC for the political left and Fox more for the right, and CNN just wanting access to the people in political power.
Well, that's true. I mean, cable television has fragmented news.
Talk
media.
radio has. I would say the internet has.
The internet.
We're
it's
all
got its
over
pros
the
and
place.
cons. It's,
you have these niche media markets.
Yeah.
It's fragmented, even entertainment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Of various sorts.
And this polarizes us ideologically. I think one step that might help would have to be making for more competitive congressional districts that blend rural with suburban and urban. I guess if they required like 90-degree angles on various, or at least some 180-degree angles on each congressional district, that's not to me unreasonable. I think that would
but
get
what's
us
the
to
likelihood that something like that's going to be implemented?
Yeah, well, you have to look at the interests of these people in power.
Yeah.
One thing I brought up in a prior discussion that we had, which I think is very, very important. Governorships are very, very important, especially if someone is elected to the governorship shortly after a United States Census, because the governors manage commissions to reshape congressional districts.
Right.
As we know, some states will lose a seat, they may gain a seat, and the governor, whoever is governor of a state, has a lot to say about influencing, how the districts are redrawn.
Right.
Okay? And, of course, Republicans have been accused of gerrymandering, making artificial things.
Everybody does
But
it. Right?
one thing, which either of you wish to comment, I know you're the moderator, but the thing is, the Republican Party put together, and I think they even called it an autopsy of the election when Romney lost, to see how can we try to improve our chances.
Right.
And as a political scientist, you try to be objective, although you have your own feelings, all right, based on emotion and your intellect. But trying to be objective about it, I've heard many political scientists say that they put out this report that they have to reach out to certain demographic groups, and they're not doing it.
Right.
Because their base is against that objective.
I mean, you've heard of this study that they did, I'm sure,
Well, Like, I
But
know...
they're not following their own advice.
They feel like they can't. Their hands are tied.
Well, yes. I mean, they feel like if they reach out to Hispanics, the perception among the base that already exists within the Republican Party
that
is
they're being betrayed.
Well, it's that.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
Well, in order to appeal to them, they would have to move to the left as far as public policy matters go.
Right.
It's not like pathway to citizenship.
Right.
To them, as a related example, would mean more people voting for Democrats instead of Republicans. So the base does not feel safe. They feel like the Republican base and the Tea Party people, and there are I cited the number 40 million out of the 310 I mean, they really, there's a xenophobia there.
Yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
or nativism, I don't know which adjective you want to use to describe what's happening in the country.
Yeah.
But you guys know Steve Kornacki. He brought up how a lot of when they, I think Chris Hayes brought this up too, again on MSNBC, that a lot of these people that live in these Tea Party districts or very strongly affiliated with that mindset, they feel like they're surrounded by hostile forces.
Right, absolutely.
You know, that this is...
so they're in a defensive,
very
isolationist
much
kind of
so.
mode. Yeah.
Do you think that in politics, and I put this indictment, if you will, on Democrats very often too, is that there is a fear of compromise because that means that you have to agree to a certain degree with the opposition party. And I think a lot, I could be wrong, but my opinion is that a lot of Republicans have this paranoia that if we agree too much, then it's like people might say, well, what the hell do we need Republican Party
What's
for?
the difference between you and the Democrats now?
Don't you think that might be working there a
Well,
little
sure,
bit?
that's a factor.
But this country used to have that back when Gerald Ford or,
There was more bipartisanship.
like Eisenhower,
Take
right?
Tip O'Neill and Ronald
Absolutely.
Reagan. Classic example of guys that would almost be yelling at each other,
Right.
virtually.
But they could, under certain circumstances, they would work together to accomplish greater
Why
good
not
of the
now?
society. Well, now because people have been driven into two really ideologically opposed camps. We're back to ideology again. And they're more, I guess, wedded to their ideology.
Why now?
Why now? I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I did bring up that media piece of it with the talk radio fragmentation. But there's also liberal talk radio. That's Sirius satellite radio. And we have it with the cable news.
Yeah.
I emailed you articles about that.
Yes, and I read most of them.
And you know, we have our niche websites like Red State America, and then there are ones for on the left too. I guess the Nation magazine. There's too much fragmentation in our discourse. We're not spending enough time with each other to know what the other person's really like. I bring up like with Red America and Blue America, and there's that sharp divide.
Well, perhaps this little discussion in some way could be the first step in the direction of a kind of new consensus in America that will bring us all together under some larger ideological umbrella. I don't know what that might be.
Wait till we're elected. There will be changes.
Or at least with ideological mindsets that aren't as sharply
demarcated and divided.
Like moderate right, moderate left, not like extremists. There's just too much polarity.
Why can't we all just be some kind of rational progressives? I mean, that's why I like to think of the more ideal mental, philosophical, ideological stances. Why shouldn't we want to just make everything as good as we can make it, and where things are not working well, why don't we try to make them better?
I think there's a paranoia that parties, like I said, are afraid if they even compromise too much, they're going to lose their identity.
I know.
That's
we should be beyond that, but we're not.
I think it's so keep your, like we jokingly say to one of our chess club members, well, you're a Reagan Republican. I still love you. Yeah, we joke around like that. Sure. But Reagan, they often say, if he was around today,
be a Democrat.
He originally was a Democrat. But they say that he would be too centrist.
To win the nomination.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I hear that from all the experts.
Okay. Just to wrap things up, because I have to remind you that we have to end this pretty soon. Ideologies, good or bad? Real quick. And why? But make it short.
John?
Are ideologies good or bad? Is that the question?
Good or bad, yeah.
Well, as I said just a moment ago, ideologies can be good, but not when they're extremely separated from one another and they don't have common ground. If one ideology is on one side and the other ideology is on the other side, and they can't figure out how they can work together to make things better for the people that live in the country, and in this case, talk about the United States of America. If we can't figure out how to make a liberal ideology and a conservative ideology meld together somehow to make things better for the people that live here, then ideologies are a bad thing. And that's what we're stuck with right now, as far as I can see, is a situation where ideologies are dividing and separating and stagnating our government and keeping us from working together in a bipartisan fashion to accomplish the objectives of society, to make things work better where they're not working well, and to improve things.
Okay, let's give this John a chance.
Okay, well, I agree, I guess, mostly with what John says. I believe that whether you like it or not, meaning anybody in general, okay, I believe we all have ideologies. In other words, like I think that people who are down and out should have help from the government, because the government should be able to more efficiently help the down and out people rather than private charities. Mm-hmm. Some people jokingly say that when the federal government wants to run anything, it gets all screwed up. Well, but if the federal government works with the states, like with the Obamacare, the governors who are setting up the state exchanges, the Obamacare is working very well in signing people up. So, you know, but I think whether we like it or not, we all have an ideology. I mean, if you ask a typical Tea Partier, well, what do you think about people that are really down and out and poor and all that? Well, we should help them, but they'll say, but we got to find a different way to do it. But privately. But and then you ask, and some of them that even say, well, the government should kind of help, but they don't tell you, well, how should they go about it? They don't even give you a clue.
They don't suggest a methodology.
And when Romney said, well, although Obamacare is patterned after what we did in Massachusetts, well, Massachusetts isn't like the rest of the country. Well, is it that much different?
I know Western Massachusetts is quite rural.
Yeah, but what I mean is, if you had, the problem is, if the Republicans were to say, gee, Obamacare is really pretty good because we had a model of that in Massachusetts, we should use it.
Well, let me just say this, and I think I'm just going to end with myself. I'm going to say ideologies, they're subjective. They have their validity. I think that they help guide us in deciding what particular political parties and political leaders, elected officials stand for. So they are helpful in that sense. And, you know, we have our own value judgments that are subjective. I think they become dangerous when we rely on them so much that we're not even going to compromise and take the other person's perspective into consideration. So it's very much a double-edged sword. And we have to be careful with how we use our ideology. We're definitely entitled to our ideology, which ultimately comes down to our opinion, right? It is, after all, subjective, as I said before. But if we put compromise at least the high level as ideology, I think our world becomes a better place. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's it.
Until next time.